The Telecommunications and Technology Sustainability Working Group, TTSWG, was set up to promote and integrate sustainability in both the telecommunications and technology industries while significantly contributing to achieving sustainable development goals. The working group has 4 pillars directed towards achieving these overarching goals. Research and advocacy. TTSWG supports the commission of research studies about the industry and science of telecoms and technology and how they affect the industry with respect to the environment and social impact. Capacity development. The working group organizes trainings to upskill member organizations on emerging trends and best practices with a focus on sustainability and climate needs. Policy formulation support. We develop sustainability principles to guide member organizations and others on how to approach sustainability challenges. Develop unique strategies to convert these to opportunities for innovation and sustainable operations. Resource mobilization and intervention. We believe that our various interventions can be better coordinated and mobilized to improve socio-cultural conditions of many host communities. As a result, we encourage meaningful partnership and collaboration for greater impact. Numerous opportunities and benefits exist for members of the working group, which includes but not limited to 1. Access to industry trends and thought leadership on sustainability and sustainable development. 2. Access to networking opportunities with other industry players, regulators, and key industry decision makers. 3. Opportunity to champion and shape industry policies. 4. Opportunity to share technical resources to drive innovation and business sustainability. 5. Strategic positioning as thought leaders on industry sustainability standards. The TTSWG currently consists of a network of private, public, and non-profit organizations with a common vision to improve sustainability practices and standards. Your organization should be part of history. Join the Telecommunications and Technology Sustainability Working Group today, and together let us shape now and the future. For more inquiries, please contact TTSWG Secretariat on +234 813 661 1906.org. Follow us on social media, Instagram and Twitter at TTSWG_NG.
combines responsibilities she has held as Minister of Finance and as Minister of State for Budget and National Planning. In her role, she has spearheaded several initiatives, including the development and launch of the Strategic Revenue Growth Initiative, the SIGI, a cross-agency suite of interventions aimed at boosting domestic revenues, and the reconstituted National Tax Policy Implementation Committee, responsible for drafting the 2019 Finance Bill, which was passed into law in January 2020. We know it as the Finance Act of 2020, and the return of the budget cycle in sync with the fiscal year. She also launched Project Lighthouse, a data driven artificial intelligence engine that supports an analytical view of revenue resources across the country, optimizes the collection of those revenues, and helps officials ensure that major revenue loopholes are plugged. Mrs. Ahmed is a seasoned accountant with about 40 years of experience, including leadership roles in both the public and private sectors. She graduated with a BSc Accounting from the Ahmadu Bello University, Zaria, Nigeria, and an MBA from Ogun State University, Ago-Iwoye, Nigeria. She's married with children and grandchildren. Please, let's give it up for Dr. Zainab Shamshuna Ahmed.
The COVID-19 pandemic has had a big impact on economies around the world. Beyond the steep contraction of economies across the world in real GDP, drop in household income, uncertain business climate, increased unemployment and underemployment, constrained fiscal space, and weakened international trade position, the impact also reveals heightened domestic risks going forward. Nigeria's dependence on oil revenue and foreign exchange exacerbated the impact and made our economy vulnerable to relapse to a recession that we successfully exited in 2017. Real GDP dipped by 6.1% to 15.9 trillion in the second quarter of 2020 from 16.9 trillion in the corresponding period last year. In nominal terms, the GDP contracted by 3% to 34 trillion in the second quarter of 2020 from 35 trillion in the second quarter of 2019. Beyond GDP contraction, the situation made many sectors of our economy vulnerable, given the large size of our informal economy and the high percentage of vulnerable population that live on daily wages. It was imperative to respond with a fiscal stimulus and a plan to stimulate the economy, protect jobs, promote manufacturing and local industries, and protect our very poor and vulnerable groups. On this basis, the President constituted the Economic Sustainability Committee, of which I am a part of, under the chairmanship of His Excellency the Vice President, with a clear mandate of developing the Economic Sustainability Plan that will include fiscal policy measures, monetary policy measures, and real sector measures aimed at responding adequately to the challenges faced from the pandemic. Given the limited fiscal space and the quantum of challenge that we faced, a fiscal stimulus package of 2.3 trillion was sourced, including 500 billion from special accounts. Also, 1.1 billion from CBN on structured lending, as well as 334 billion from bilateral multilateral loans, and 302 billion from other sources of funding. In view of the current business climate, the government will provide resources to support private sector through off-taking programs, and this includes lending facilities to the real sector of the economy, especially in view of the backward integration and value chain linkages to help ease our dependency on imports and foreign exchange pressures. Other cross-cutting measures include digital initiatives, including creating much-needed digital identity that guarantees our ability to distribute palliatives equitably, It also includes broadband infrastructure, preparing Nigerians for the workforce of the future, which will in turn enable the Industry 4.0 type of businesses and manufacturing, including pharmaceutical products, which are critical in view of the protectionist policies that we have witnessed following shortages from increased demand brought about by the pandemic. To stimulate the real economy, the real sector measures were put in place to protect and create jobs in agriculture, food security, housing, construction, renewable energy infrastructure, manufacturing, as well as the digital economy. These measures are in tune with what economists and pundits of sustainable development are advocating on creating a green and inclusive growth that leaves no one behind. The plan also focuses on local material sourcing to help ease the supply chain disruptions that the private sector has witnessed from the pandemic. It also seeks to foster new ways of working in the new normal and also leveraging on the digital economy. The plan continues to support the economic diversification journey that the ERGP set out at the first term of this administration, including interventions in other key extractive sectors, including mines, which also has large artisan jobs. To maximize government revenue, the plan includes policies to enable successful implementation of tax reforms through the Finance Act 2020 and also to ensure that our revenue-generating entities have resilient systems and can continue to operate amidst the lockdown. I would like to reiterate the government's commitment to fiscal prudence and ensure that Nigerians and taxpayers get value for our nation's wealth. In line with this, the Nigeria Economic Sustainability Plan includes policies to rationalize tax expenditures and incentives to recover unremitted funds by government-owned enterprises and unlock value from government assets that lie idle or are underutilized. Other tough fiscal reforms that are needed to create the right investment and business climate include removing the high fiscal drainers in the form of subsidies in both the power as well as the fuel, with the aim of freeing up fiscal space to invest in physical infrastructure, human capital, and other softer governance systems that are critical to the ease of doing business. The challenges we face are grave. It requires a total shift that requires doing things differently, and this will involve reforms that require sacrifices and short-term discomfort, but will yield much bigger returns in the long term. I therefore would like to use this opportunity of this platform to encourage private sector and other sectors to cooperate and support the government in changing the narrative and really addressing the pervasive challenges that impede growth and development of our country. This is the expectation from government. We are open to exploring public-private partnership on the interventions and also on other key sectors of the economy. I want to encourage private sector participants to explore this avenue and join hands with government in charting Nigeria back to a resilient and sustainable path of growth.
We would like to thank the Honorable Minister, Dr. Shamsuna Ahmed, Dr. Zainab Shamsuna Ahmed, for this wonderful presentation, for this wonderful speech. While we await the Honorable Minister for Trade and Investment, we would move on to the first panel of the day. Thank you very much. Over to you, Emilia.
morning, everyone. My name is Fumi Olani. I work with the Private Clients and Family Wealth Unit of Anderson Tax, Nigeria. In this session, we'll be focusing on fast-tracking economic recovery through robust tax policies and practices. We have two sessions for today, and we know that due to the global economic slowdown occasioned by the coronavirus pandemic, there's a dire need to articulate policies and practices that will guarantee economic recovery within record time. COVID-19 was first identified in China in December 2019 and has caused huge deaths and spread to almost all the parts of the world. Most of the world economy and financial markets have been affected by the lockdown and social distancing measures put in place by governments across the world to reduce the spread of COVID-19. The first case of COVID-19 was first identified in Nigeria in February 2020, and since then, the uncertainty and general decline in global economic activities, as well as the sharp drop in the price of crude oil, has affected Nigeria's prospects of reversing the downward trend in portfolio investments. Organizations in Nigeria are undergoing serious cash flow deficits, which has negatively impacted their ability to meet financial obligations, among which is the need to pay taxes. We have two sessions in today's program, and in each session, our discussion will be focused on how tax policies and practices can be utilized as a tool for revamping these businesses and ensuring economic recovery. So I would like to introduce our panelists on the session today. The first person is Mr. Olushola Teniola. So just a brief introduction of Olushola Teniola. Is a technology expert based in Lagos, Nigeria. Olushola Teniola is the current president of the Association of Telecommunications Company of Nigeria, ATCON. A man of many exploits, Olushola Teniola has paid his dues in ICT in Nigeria and beyond. Teniola's ICT career spans over 25 years across the globe, where he handles strategic management positions at several major telecoms companies. Olushola Teniola, it's good to have you here.
Good morning to you.
Good morning. Thanks.
Good morning for me and to your viewers. I've not turned on my video, but I will turn it on.
Please do.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
There you go. Good morning to you all. You can see me. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. Thank you. Our second panelist is Benga Adebayo. Engineer Benga Adebayo is the chairman of the Association of Licensed Telecommunications Operators in Nigeria, a non-profit industry association for all private telecommunications operators in Nigeria. Described as a telecom wizard, he is a member of several telecommunications ventures. He is the chairman of chief executive also of Communication Network Support Services Limited and CNSSL Contact Center Limited, a leading business process outsource company in telecoms, network engineering, and contact center operations across Nigeria. You're very welcome, Mr. Benga.
Thank you very much. Good morning, and thanks for having me. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being part of the program today. So our third panelist on today's session is Taiwo Oyedele. Good morning, Taiwo. So just to give a brief of about Taiwo. Pardon me, please. Okay, so I'll just like to give a brief about Taiwo. Taiwo is a partner in PwC, is a seasoned tax expert, and is a policy partner and West African tax partner at PwC. He is the chairman of the COVID-19 Intervention Committee for PwC West Africa and the chairman PwC Nigerian Ethics Committee. Taiwo is a career and leadership coach, a mentor, an author, and a contributor to the annual Doing Business report of the World Bank. Taiwo Oyedele, it's good to have you here today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for being part of us today. So I'll just go straight to the questions that I have for you today. Perhaps I should start from Taiwo Yedele. So the question that lingers in everyone's mind is, how can the government ensure Nigerians' average tax to GDP ratio doesn't decline as a result of the pandemic? How can we ensure that it doesn't decline?
Yeah, okay, thank you very much. I think maybe to quickly start by just setting the context that in terms of telecommunication and technology, we need to try and contextualize the contribution to the economy, currently around about 9 to 10% of the GDP, which is about 14 trillion. And if you think about an economy like Nigeria, where our GDP contribution is in terms of income and consumption, this is easily to say that without this sector, we're going to have millions, if not tens of millions of people more in poverty. So that contribution is significant, and particularly because of the COVID-19 experience we are going through, we have seen the telecom and technology sector playing the lifeblood role of the economy to ensure that we have business continuity and that we have productivity. So I thought that is really important to mention. In terms of the contribution to tax, especially tax to GDP ratio, I'll say that what Nigeria needs to do, in my view, it's simple, and we need to use the COVID-19 situation as an opportunity. Like they always say, do not waste a crisis. So one of the things we have to do is getting the right people to pay tax. Even before COVID-19, I think there was too much focus on people that are at the lower end of society. There was too much focus on industry that are visible. So you go to telcos, you go to banks, you go to oil companies, and then you leave a lot of other people not paying their fair share of taxes. And you also have to ensure that you use technology. I like the example of Kaduna State. So we're not mentioning America now or Europe. We're back home here. So Kaduna State introduced technology, and they were able to increase their IGR from 13 billion to over 44 billion in just about 2 years. And they did not introduce any new taxes, right? So which means we can actually leverage this sector to be able to raise our tax to GDP ratio without introducing new taxes. And in fact, I would argue that we need to repeal many of the taxes that we have currently that only create problems for businesses, but do not generate revenue for government.
Thank you so much. Very interesting and insightful. So I'll go to Olushola Teniola. My question is, what are your thoughts on the challenges organizations face, such as the multiple taxation, as well as the FRS circular to telecommunications company to remit taxes, despite many organizations making generous donations to support the national response to the COVID-19 pandemic? What do you think is the major challenge that organizations face concerning taxation?
Thanks for that, for me. It is very evident from what my brother Taiwo has stated that digital economy is going to be the bedrock of our society going forward. It is not even optional anymore. We either transform ourselves or we get left behind. So we still need a lot of work to build infrastructure that supports that digital economy. And our sector is critical to that. Connectivity is important. And even more so, not only the connectivity, that the connectivity is ubiquitous. So it connects every citizen in Nigeria, both those that live in the urban cities and those that live in the rural and semi-rural areas. So we have a challenge in front of us. And that challenge is essentially that the industry is private sector driven and private sector led, and it has attracted investments. And those investments are to the tune of about $70 billion, way above our annual budget, especially when you consider that the current budget for the government is 13 trillion naira, which is about $26 billion. So you have these investments that we need to build upon. And it could be argued that the transformation that we require will require at least 130 billion by the time we get to 2030 to sustain our growth in population size. So the inhibitors are essentially very obvious. We can't start to impose taxes, multiple taxes, that actually kills the goose that lays the golden egg. And why is that? Because essentially, we should be looking at taxing the outcomes, like what Tayo said. The current companies and entities that are carrying the burden are in the formal sector of the economy. Those are the most visible ones. But you can't overburden them with tax if you don't spread that tax base. So what we argue, especially in the telecom sector, is that there should be a consideration for harmonization of the multiple taxes. And we have about 39 taxes, levies, and charges indiscriminately applied to our industry. Because if you don't do that, we cannot plan. We cannot plan for CapEx programs that is very capital intensive in terms of our industry and needs careful planning because there's uncertainty in policy decisions. So we really need to sit down, have a dialogue with government to understand what are those taxes that we feel are not really applicable to our sector. And those taxes that are applicable, that we are paying, we should review and look at how can we harmonize so that those taxes that are paid at the federal level are shared with the states and the local government parts of the government. Because if we don't, what we have a mad rush from all parts of government seeking to extract the maximum revenue out of an industry that is critical. And therefore, that will in turn reduce the ability of investors to actually bring money because they're paying more, or they consider paying more to taxes as opposed to the investments. And we need that infrastructure for the youth, for our growing population, to be able to be part and parcel of this digital transformation and the digital economy. Before I finish, I just wanted to highlight that right now as we speak, we've already had consideration of a CST, a communication services tax of 9%. 9%, even to consider that is even wrong because our VAT is only 7.5%. It's only recently been increased from 50% to 7.5%. So if you now add an additional 9% to all calls, SMS, online transactions, electronic transactions, that, in my estimate, is 16.5%. That's really burdensome, not only to those that are struggling to survive, but those who aren't able to afford data services will never be able to afford data services. So you have this big gap between those that have and those that don't have. And then we have a cybersecurity fund, levy fund, that will now attract 0.005% of every transaction, not only to be burdened on the telecoms providers, but internet service providers, the financial institutions, insurance companies, and I believe the Nigerian Stock Exchange. Again, this, even though it's into law, we have to review the reality that if we impose these further charges, it again acts as a barrier to affordability and would dissuade people from going online. And considering the fact that we have 50% of the global world population who are offline, you can see the challenge that that poses. Then there's this thinking of digital taxes. I'm not saying that those that are making profit from source should not pay taxes, but this digital taxes seems to be arbitrary, and arbitrary in the sense that there's some arbitrary figure that would be taken from the thin air and then applied across those that are present in the country and those are non-present. I think, again, we need to be very careful that we try and chase these shadows just because we're desperate to seek income for the way we run governance. Then the last part is the recurring thematics. I mentioned the 39 taxes. One of the biggest hindrance to the deployment of broadband infrastructure is the cost associated around rights of ways. We've had some overtures by 7 states, and I hope that another 2 would join. But however, once we've achieved a reduction in our rights of ways, other charges associated around the maintenance of infrastructure, whether it's ducts or fiber, are now applied. And those fees are now exceeding far greater than the reduction in rights of ways. Let's really have a conversation that is honest, that is truthful to our citizens. Are we seriously considering building a digital economy which will create a digital divide of haves and have-nots? Because any charges applied to investments will naturally be passed on to the consumers. And that's you and I. Thank you.
Thank you, Olushola. In fact, I was going to mention the right of way because I know Lagos State's kickback on the federal government peg on 145 naira. They moved it to 1,500 per kilometer. So I feel the plight of the telecommunications company right now, but I mean, you're on this platform to address them and they're listening. So please, if you want to join the conversation, please, you can join via slido.com. using the event code #TaxCon, which is TAXCON. So you can send in your questions if you have questions. I will take the question. I will go to Benga Adebayo right now. And my question to you is, what are the two major learning outcomes for telecommunications operators from this pandemic? And how can they be leveraged on to foster Nigeria's growth and economic recovery post-COVID-19?
Thank you for having me. For us in the industry, I think two key learning points are, one is that we have one national network, irrespective of what side of the network you belong. It's one national network. And on that, it's the preparations. We were prepared for the lockdown. We were prepared to the extent that the industry had enough headroom to cope with the upsurge in traffic. And we are glad that throughout the months of lockdown, we never had one day of national outage. And I think that is significant. Significant because you could imagine people not being able to communicate. Even emergency and medical services would not have been able to communicate if we had one day of national breakdown of telecom infrastructure. So I think that is one key point. The second key point is that telecom has become the most critical infrastructure to any economy, to the extent that without telecommunication services, the world will have come to a complete halt, actually. And in that regard, it is very important that all stakeholders begin to see the critical nature of telecom infrastructure and provide not just incentive, but I would say regulatory framework and tax regime that will be favorable to telecom providers. The situation that we face today on the issue of multiple taxes and regulation is that there are taxes against the industry as if we are an extractive sector. A few of those taxes are introduced like telecom services, like an all business service, which are an extractive sector, and we are not one of those. You've heard about the number of taxes and levies that we face, and our problem is not even in some of those taxes, but it's in the mechanism for collecting those taxes. You have states introducing a particular set of taxes that already exist or that are in the exclusive leave of the federal government, and the state governments often set up their own tax collection army that goes about closing telecommunications sites, harassing telecommunications workers, and all of that. So in summary, the first point is that preparation. Sustainability can only happen if we are prepared for it. If the industry didn't have the kind of headroom required to sustain the national network during the lockdown, the situation would have been completely different. The second is that incentive must be provided to support the critical nature of telecom services. It's obvious today that the world without telecommunication would be a different place entirely. And I'd also like to mention the issue of human capital. It's relevant because we have a lot of our young talents who are leaving our industry for better economies because those countries provide better social guarantees. So you have a young engineer who's been trained, who is certified in certain areas of telecom practice, and he's just looked out for any better opportunity, even in less developed economies, but that provide better social guarantee. And I think if we're talking about sustainability, this is something that stakeholders need to begin to talk about. How can we retain our human capital? That we don't train and lose. Those are my thoughts at this stage. There are more questions in the course of the conversation. I'll have more to say. Thank you.
Yeah, very, very interesting because I know the cost that the telecom industry put into doing business. A lot of companies do that too, but it's peculiar with your industry. But at the same time, I'm also happy that there was no shutdown globally with the telecoms, and that means there was major revenue. I mean, on the lighter notes. So I would also ask Adebayo a question. During the pandemic, there seemed to be a mismatch in communication and expectation between the telecoms operators and the FRS or budget office with respect to the gains and remittances of tax. You mentioned one part already, but has this been fully dealt with? And are all the parties aligned to your satisfaction? I hope it's not a no.
Well, we think the directive by the FRSS was ill-informed. That's what we think, because it's like looking at that is income without cost. That's what it looks like they were looking at. They thought that the industry is making revenue, making money, without thinking about the significant cost that goes into running the networks. For example, haulage during the lockdown was a problem. Though we had the passage, we had right of passage from the presidential committee, we had that same from the minister, we had that from the police. But we have cases where for 3-4 days, haulage trucks were held by soldiers on the way, and they would not just allow them to pass. The cost of freighting those facilities, I mean, diesel to some of those sites became significantly high in that period. We needed also to provide extra security for our men who work in those periods. These are costs that we can't even discuss with anyone. And in order to run the network 24/7, you have people working. While people are at home, staying at home, we had workers working around the clock, not just behind the exchanges, but also on the field to ensure that networks don't go down. So we think it is ill-informed for the FI to come back and say that the industry has made a lot of money without recognizing the significant cost, both in terms of economy and in terms of human capital, that has gone into sustaining the network at the period. The issue is not resolved. It is still there. We don't think it will go away, but we think reasonableness has to prevail. That's what we think. Yeah. We do not think the issue of multiple taxes will go away, but we think that parties have to be reasonable in exercising the demand for collection of taxes and levies. That's what we are saying.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. So I think I'll just ask Olushola a question, and it's a following question from the right of way. So, some governors, like Benga mentioned, some governors already have reduced the charges for the right of way. Some increased it, and other association license fees to boost infrastructure development of the broadband and the IT services. But what is your opinion? Because I know that this cost is passed to the consumer, which is myself and the audience. What is the opinion of the association, and what other opportunities are left unaddressed at both the federal and the state levels? Because we cannot suffer for all of this cost, because it comes back to the final consumers. So please, what do you advise? What are the opinions of the association and the opportunities that that the federal and state need to take cognizance of?
One of the things that is very evident, and I think my brother Benga Adebayo touched on it, is that we operate in an environment where, not only in the telecoms, but I think that in the telecoms, because it's a very critical sector, 24/7, 365 days in a year, the operations operate. They have to work, there's no downtime. So those costs, like the running diesel generators, getting haulage of diesel to base stations, has become part of our DNA over the almost 20 years that GSM operators and others have existed. But government has to realize is that this cost, when you compare it to other environments and jurisdictions where we can operate off a grid that is reliable, and that's the power grid I'm referring to. So those costs that we are bearing are costs that we shouldn't bear in the first place. I think the ideal scenario would be a mobile service provider collects a license and plugs in place, because there is one national network, for instance, as Benga Adebayo pointed out, like we have in other countries like Ghana. Ghana, for instance, they have a higher percentage of fixed line presence than in Nigeria. So you have our private sector players who are doing all the verticals, including security. You know, these are costs that really you can't really plan for, because depending on the environment and the state you work in, it can vary. Now, in terms of rights of ways, and that's another typical one, you have some states where, yes, they're trying to harmonize and harvest their IGR collections. However, they have to also realize that any taxes that they apply to an operator, even if it's absorbed by the operator, you know, reluctantly in some cases, because they've got to basically have their base station still operating, they can't have it closed down, or they obviously want to extend fiber to their base stations, or to build their networks for wider coverage to ensure that the quality of service is there. Those taxes or charges that apply, they're not really taxes, they're extortionist demands in some cases. Those will ripple towards the consumer. And it's not only you for me, we are also on this panel as consumers of the services. So when there's a clamor from consumers that they want prices to drop on data, for instance, and there's a huge clamor, the problem is that when you look at the P&L, the profit and loss sheet of the best performing operator in our industry, and you go down to the bit where it says profits after tax or profit just before tax, you tend to find actually those elements that would normally should be after tax, i.e. for tax element, are not included. They're actually included in the operational costs. So the margin squeeze are so small that we're talking about single digits for profit, and that's for the best performing operator. So if you extrapolate that and transpose it down throughout the whole sector, you tend to find that people are not making money. Yes, there might be a revenue number, as Wenga has highlighted. Yes, it might be a certain figure, but when you take out all the cost of operating in Nigeria, across the states, across the local governments, and at the federal level, you tend to find that it only appears that unless you have economies of scale, unless you're a huge operator, then you might have your head above the water. And if you have a smaller presence, and we have a lot of smaller players than larger players in this sector, we have quite a diverse ecosystem, you tend to find that they're struggling. And then when they're looking for funds to actually expand, those are double digits. When you look at inflation, it's double digits. You know, so what we're finding is that actually the cost of doing business against any operators is close to 60 to 70%. But what's publicized is, you know, your CIT at 30% or 23% or something like that. Those are not the real figures. So there is this cushion that's involved in doing business in Nigeria that is hard to plan because it varies across the states. It's hard to actually identify because it's a moving target. And we are saying that we really need to build a digital economy that is for the future. We can't do that unless we have harmonized taxes, harmonized in the sense that we really need the Ministry of Finance to basically review the 2016 stance on the number of taxes that are applied to our sector. And then even when those taxes are applied and we pay because we are law-abiding citizens, that they are appropriately allocated. Federal takes its bit, state takes its bit, local government takes its bit, so that they don't have this urge to say, I haven't been paid, or go and pay mine now, or I'll close your base station. And I think that's the fundamental. It's just that government is pressed to generate the income. They see taxes as the only means. And I really feel for them because it's a tough environment right now. Globally, there's no free money. But the problem is that if you don't make the industry attractive enough, the FDI or local direct investment will not enter the sector. And it's not about the population size, it's the reality that really, that this needs to be incentivized. So incentivize the sector players, give them the palliatives, give them the structures that will enable them to go into those areas that they don't feel like going. Otherwise, they'll just sit back and sweat their assets. And that's a normal business play. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Olushola. I can actually feel your pain in that regard. So I align with what you've mentioned, all your comments. So before I go to Taiwo Yedele, please, we have the poll going on right now. The poll has been launched on slido.com, and the audience, I'm just calling on the audience. You're encouraged to participate by answering the poll questions. We'll announce the winner at the end of the session, the panel session. So just to go to Taiwo Yedele, I have two questions for you. So despite the urgent need for economic recovery, should the government consider and offer organizations additional tax incentives, and why? Why do you think they need to give more incentives to taxpayers?
All right, thank you very much. I'll say the answer to that is yes and no. So clearly government does not have the resources to give all the incentives that everybody wants. And by the way, in Nigeria, even before COVID-19, everybody wanted incentives. So what I would say is that government needs to administer targeted incentives. It will be incentives that are designed to help very vulnerable sectors and very vulnerable individuals. Of course, if you think about airlines, hotels, they will definitely take priority over even telecom and technology. So government has to, of course, rely on data in doing that. It's not a question of sentiment. But what I think is even more important is that government needs to remove these incentives. So I'll say for the telecommunication and technology sector, the priority, if you ask me, will be how can we get government to remove these incentives, because we're making it difficult for them to do business. And therefore, we are limiting their ability to create value and help the other sectors, including even MSMEs, including agri, including manufacturing. Government has to see the role of this sector as a sector that facilitates not only their own sector, but the rest of the economy. I think that's extremely key. So just to make the point about the FRS letter, the way I understand it, because on one hand, we're saying government should give incentive, but government needs money to give the incentive. The way I understand the FRS letter was trying to say for sectors that have the ability to pay on time, it's not a new tax they were imposing. They're just saying we are giving extension to so many sectors who have no money to pay. For those sectors who have the money to pay the cash flow, please, can you pay your tax on time? I'll say there's nothing wrong with that. But if FRS is then insinuating anything other than that, maybe that's where we should focus the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Taiwo. So my other question to Taiwo is, what best practices would you recommend to the government at the federal level and also at the state level in a post-pandemic or economic recovery phase? Because we all know what is going on right now. There's a dwindle in the oil price, and the government is actually relying solely on taxation, the inflow from taxation. So what best practices would you recommend to the government?
Yeah, excellent question. I think maybe I'll start by saying what government should not do, because many times we focus on what government should do, we forget to tell them what they shouldn't do. I'll say the first thing not to do at this time is no new taxes. It is going to be a contradiction and of course counterproductive for you to introduce any new taxes in whatever guise. Then the second one is don't increase the rate of existing taxes under any circumstances. And number three is don't increase the tax compliance burden. So sometimes you have not introduced a new tax, you've not increased rate, but it just made life impossible. So we need to bear in mind, and like I've said before, we need to see telecommunication and technology now almost like the seed. You don't want to eat the seed, right? You have to identify, if there are areas where you find the fruits. I'm not saying don't tax telecommunication sector. Clearly, the example that Olusola made earlier on about the communication tax is something I've been fighting myself because I don't see the point. So if you identify the fruits and you tax it rationally, and then the rest of it, allow it to thrive. Then what should government do? Reduce multiple taxes. We are familiar with this 80-20 rule, but I'll say for taxes, it's even 90-10. 90-10 because 90% of government revenue comes from 10% of the taxes, but 90% of the headache is coming from the other, small aspects that in terms of contribution. If government can repeal, for this sector over, let's say out of 39, you limit it to just 5 taxes. You collect even more. So the people pay less and government collects more. Because when you have too many taxes, what happens is people pay, government doesn't collect because leakages and wastage will come into the place. And government has to also leverage this sector to be able to get data for planning. I gave the example of Kaduna State earlier on, but even beyond that, the world is moving now more online. So we are physically distancing, but technologically we're getting more together. So which means even the informal sector where government has no data before are now online, which means our ability to collect data is what government should be focusing on, not immediately taxing everybody they find. When you collect that data, use it for planning, economic planning, and then for supporting businesses so that they can grow. When they do grow, of course, they should pay taxes, and that is the right way to go. And finally, I would say government has to address cost of collection so that we gain some efficiency, and then the efficiency of spending. I think that is one of the reasons why the trust level between Nigerians and government is at an all-time low. Because when you see all these numbers about what we're spending, in the revised budget for 2020, there was 2 billion for building a library for the National Assembly. That breaks my heart. So we need to address all these issues. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Taiwo, for that, because I saw the budget and I was wowed by that particular amount put for the library. And I think you've just seen through our audience questions. We have one question that relates to what you just mentioned about cost. So one of our audience sent a question and said, what is the structure in place to ensure efficient use of tax proceeds stemming from the need to cut costs of national governance? What will Taiwo help? Taiwo, this question goes to you because I'm sure Olushola and Benga don't really know the answers to this because you are the expert.
Yeah, I know. I listened to the Honorable Minister for Finance and I was really very happy with all the initiatives and the measures that she's trying to put together. We have to admit that this is a difficult time for all of us and there are no easy solutions or easy ways out. I think the way to try and hold government to account is first and foremost to even show interest. So this information I just gave now about 2 billion for library, and there's so many other ones. Many Nigerians don't know, so they can't even ask the questions. That's why you find organizations such as Budget, and I see they're also your partners here. Budget puts out a lot of information. Maybe on a good day, you find 500 people liking it, and then you find someone who is half naked. They have 10,000 likes and retweets. That doesn't help our life. It's okay to love entertainment, follow what you want, watch BB Nigeria. But when it comes to issues that affect us, we need to show interest. When we show interest, then our political leaders would respond to that. So, and platforms like this are also very useful because I know a lot of people are watching us now. So this is providing the education. And then those platforms we have, let's use those platforms to hold government to account and things will begin to move in the right direction.
It seems everyone wants to listen more to Taiwo answering all of these tax questions. Unfortunately, well, on the second panel, we have a lot of tax experts also, but you seem to be the only one that can answer all these questions. So I have another question from the audience, and this says, telecommunications is an essential pillar for economic growth. What kind of tax reforms do you need to make data plan unlimited available to average Nigerians?
Yes, so if government thinks about the telecom and technology sector as the enabler of the economy, so it has always been the case, it's even more so now because of COVID-19. That's always a good starting point, which means even when you're trying to promote MSMEs, you need the telco and the technology sector. And I can continue on and on, but because of time. So that's a good starting point. And then the number 2 factor is you have to always contextualize your solutions. The problem we have with all these taxes coming up everywhere is because on one hand, you have people who easily compare Nigeria with other countries. And they'll tell you VAT in Nigeria is only 7.5, in our neighboring country and across Africa is 15% on the average. And I say that's apple and mango you're comparing, right? In most of these other countries, one, you get full input credit for your VAT. Number 2, many of them have challenges with infrastructure as much as we do. Like the telcos we spend on electricity, you don't do that in many other countries, even in Africa. So you have to make sure that your solutions are locally made to address your peculiar circumstances. And the other point that I need to make is that if we do a study today and find out what taxes are yielding result, and I did something like that myself, and I found out that, just last year, FRS made 99, almost 99, 98% of their revenue from just 6 taxes, right? So many of these state and local governments are not interested in the people, they're not interested in government, they're interested in their pockets. But someone has to take a step to say, if you collect multiple taxes that you're not supposed to collect and it's illegal, maybe we offset it against your allocation from the federation account. When they begin to see that it's painful for them to do the wrong thing, maybe they'll start doing the right things.
Wow, thank you so much. Thank you everyone for being part of this session. Olushola, I say thank you. Benga, thank you. Taiwo, thank you so much for being part of the session. So we'll go to the second session, which is for our panelists. I would like to announce the panelists on the second session. So the first panelist we have is Ben Akabueze. Professor Ben Akabueze is the Director General of the Budget Office for the Federation, formerly the Special Advisor to the President on Budget Matters, and also a former Lagos State Commissioner for Economic Planning. He is a well-seasoned economist with vast experience. He served as Lagos State Commissioner for Economic Planning and Budget from January 2007 till May 2015, having been appointed by the governor at the point. Ben Akabueze is very passionate about societal transformation and actively participates in programs designed to bring the desired change in his country. You're welcome, Ben Akabueze. Good morning.
Thank you very much for having me.
It's good to see you on this platform. Thank you. So our second panelist on this session is Mohamed Maman Nami. Maman is the executive chairman of the Federal Inland Revenue Service, a well-trained tax, accounting, and management practitioner. Nami had practical working experience spanning 3 decades in audits, tax advisory, management services for various clients in the banking, manufacturing services, and the public sector. This covers his professional stints first with PKF. He is an expert in rendering advisory support services to investors in respect of new business startups and management of existing businesses.
Yes, sir.
But he will be represented by the Director of Tax Policies of the FRS, Mr. Matthew Olusoyin Bojubola. You're welcome, Mr. Bojubola.
Thank you very much. Good morning.
Good morning. It's good to have you here. So our third panelist of the session is Professor Teju Shomorin. I'd like to give a brief on Professor Shomorin. Teju Shomorin is the first female professor of taxation in Nigeria. She is the immediate past president of the Chartered Institute of Taxation of Nigeria, CITN, and the immediate past president of the West African Union of Tax Institutes, WAUT. Currently, she is the head of the Association of African Tax Institute, AAIT, the pioneer head of the taxation department of Caleb University. It is good to have you here, Professor Teju. Good morning, Teju. Okay, so perhaps we should just go straight to the question of the day. So I'd like to address the FRS, which is the board, the administrator of taxation on the federal level. So Mr. Bojubola, there seems to be a heightened burden on your organization to increase remittances in line with revenue shortfall caused by the pandemic. Is this true? And how is the FRS managing this balancing act in line with the economic effects of the lockdown? We all know a lot of companies did not generate revenue when the pandemic was at its peak. So how are you able to balance this act with the economic effects of the lockdown?
Thank you very much, moderator, for that question. I think if you permit me to start this way, I think what we had before the lockdowns, whereby we depended more on revenue from commodities, specifically in our case, oil revenue, was actually the abnormal case. In all other countries, the basic source of revenue for funding government actually is taxation. Howbeit, because we had money coming in from these commodities, we sort of neglected taxation. And unfortunately, that even stayed the state of our tax, the legal framework from our taxation, whereby for many years, we never bothered to review our tax legislations to bring them up to date with current realities. I think the coming of the pandemic, as very sad as it was also good for us because it made us to see the need for us to source revenue in a sustainable way. And that was what faced the revenue service when this happened. And I agree with you, we had to do a very delicate balancing, and I can tell you we are still doing. I'm happy we have Ben, the DG budget with us. I don't envy him because there are so many things to do to put in the budget, particularly for F, particularly for security, particularly for infrastructure. But then question is, where does this money come from? And there's a limit to which we can continue to borrow. So this is the balancing act we had to do. And that was why it was a mixture of activity for FRS. We had to give palliatives for businesses that were not able to open for months. There are school teachers who had not been paid for months. And all of this, they are the practical realities that face us. And that is on the one hand. On the second hand, we need to provide money. Even the test kits for COVID-19 cost billions and billions of naira. I had the Lagos State saying to us that to treat an average infected person, that is not the extreme one, cost about 100,000 per day. And this was nothing we never thought of, which we never budgeted for. And even if we're going to go and borrow, it is those who had surplus who will be willing to lend to us. So this was the situation for the FRS. This was the situation confronting Nigeria. And this is what we have found ourselves. And the responses we have provided during that time was to try and balance this. And I know the pains are there, but then we still have to ensure that we are able to cover this basic thing. We have to exist first as human beings because we can't think of other things. Let that be my initial reaction. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Matthew Bonjubala. That was interesting. Sadly, we don't want to hear that, but that is the situation where we find ourselves, and we have to go by it. So before I go to Ben Akabueze, I'd just like to read some lines in the budget of the Economic Recovery and Resilience speech. And it says on item 5 in particular, the 2021 budget was prepared amidst a challenging global and domestic environment due to the persistent headwinds from the coronavirus pandemic. The resulting global economic recession, low oil prices, and heightened global economic uncertainty have had important implications for our economy. I'm happy that the president in draft or writing a speech noted that point. And this brings me to the question to Ben. It appears obvious that COVID-19 has impacted government's revenue. Can you share some plans, including the fiscal, you believe will boost the recovery of Nigeria's economic recovery in post-COVID?
Well, thank you, Fumi. First, let me Thank you again for inviting me to participate in this panel. And I listened attentively to the contributions of the earlier speakers, and I will be, speaking to some of the points that they made. But in the meantime, if you will let me share my screen. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
All right, thank you. In terms of, our response, okay, basically, this slide, summarizes, the situation that we face, okay? But let me share a slide that basically, this slide summarizes our response. Our response is anchored around 6 key areas, which the Honorable Minister spoke to. It is a fact that COVID-19 knocked off about 60% from our oil revenue projections, and oil revenue is about 50% of government revenue. So if 60% of that is knocked off, then effectively you've got 30% of the total revenues knocked off. And then, of course, in terms of the tax revenues, with businesses closed down and all of that, not unexpectedly, that also took a knock. And so, on the other hand, costs not only reducing, they were indeed increasing. You look at the bottom left-hand corner of the screen that I have now. It says, yes, our costs continue to spiral. Okay. I mean, at the beginning of this year, when we did the budget for 2020, nobody had whatever provision for dealing with COVID-19. We had to respond with a 500 billion naira COVID-19, fiscal plan, which was captured in the budget. I mean, the rest of the 2.3 trillion naira is not carried on the federal government budget, but there's a 500 billion naira that we had to carry. So at the time revenues were declining, costs were increasing, you had new costs that you needed to, to respond to. But the slide that I really want us to look at, okay, which speaks to the, very pointedly to today's discussion, is this one, okay? And, okay, look at this. Everyone talks about multiple taxations in Nigeria, multiple taxations. Oh, we get too many taxes, people are paying too many taxes. And yet this is the reality, that we have, one of the lowest tax to GDP ratios. In fact, this is revenue to GDP. If you do a strict tax to GDP, that number probably comes to about 6%. Okay, compared to other countries in Africa. So what is it? So it's either that these other countries have fewer taxes, but that are larger, or that, and we have, a string of smaller taxes, in which case, what we should be talking about is tax consolidation. But it's certainly, based on this evidence, not correct to say that the companies are more heavily taxed in Nigeria. Okay, and I can illustrate this with fact beyond this. On the continent of Africa, for instance, Kenya, which is another country that is actually way up at the top of the ladder in terms of the technology deployment and penetration, and even SM usage, and the application of that technology. Consumer taxes on telecom services alone in Kenya aggregate to 21%. Apart from their VAT rate, which is more than double even our higher rate, there's a 10%. There's a 10% flat charge on telecom services. That's one. The other thing is, I mean, when I hear someone say that 39 taxes, I'm alarmed, and I've been listening for specifics about what these taxes are, and I've heard very little in terms of specifics. I would really like to know what constitutes 39 taxes. And I think oftentimes people use the word tax very loosely. Okay, a right-of-way charge, I don't consider a tax. That's a specific cost for a specific service, and you cannot deny that there's a cost to that, service. So, or at least a privilege attached to that service or something. So we can talk about the quantum or whatever. And then many of these comments also, I think there's a lot of expectation from the federal government, which our constitutional arrangement does not, empower the federal government to do. We operate a federal system. The Constitution guarantees, taxing authorities to the different tiers of government, federal, state, and local governments. And really, in many of these cases, all that the federal government can do is provide guidance. So for instance, the federal government provides guidance around right-of-way charges, trying to limit it to, recommended 149 naira per, but it really can't impose it as such, and that's why some states have taken that guidance and have even made their zero, and some states are reacting, different. So I think we also need to avoid what I call a knee-jerk, reaction to once there's any, demand for anything that looks like that requires people to pay or whatever, make a condition, it's instantly, there's an instant, negative response to it. Take the point about, FIRS's, request for, telecom companies to consider, filing their returns and making payments, early and not necessarily taking advantage of, the extended time. Because the reality is that during the lockdown, and I don't think anybody can fairly say that is not a reasonable. During the the lockdown, while many businesses were completely shut down, the telecom companies were generating revenues, and all that FIRS was saying, would you guys please, because you didn't really shut down. Yes, everybody was affected somewhat by that, but because you were in a better position, you didn't to shut down completely. Like the hospitality sector that was shut down completely, even the banks were shut down, whatever. Could you consider filing your own returns earlier and paying? That was not an unreasonable, but the reaction is, oh, FIRS has written whatever, and I don't know what the things. Yet everyone expects improved infrastructure. It's down to, it becomes a chicken and egg situation. You want better infrastructure? We can't have better infrastructure without improved government revenues. Okay, we can't have improved government revenues without levying taxation, as Mr. Wola has explained. We've got to come to terms with the fact that taxation is. I'm showing on my screen another chart. In Africa, countries that apply airtime excess tax in Africa. When you run down that list, you won't see Nigeria. Excise tax on telecom, on airtime charges, on this country, it ranges from the 3% in Niger to the 18% in Gabon, with a 3.5% average on the continent. Nigeria does not feature in here. So what really are these 39 taxes that people are talking about? I'll be keen to know. I mean, the industry is always keen to celebrate its contribution to the GDP. And that's fantastic because we've come a long way and there's still a lot of progress. 14%. It would be nice, and I've been listening. I was really hoping that that Taiwo will put that out. What is the contribution to government revenues of the sector? If it's 14% of GDP, is that contribution, is it commensurate? And then truth is, when we are not take a lot of the taxes that the sector complains about are really not directly against the companies, but maybe on consumers. But even in this sector, pay as you earn, taxes, deductions that we say, how many operators in this sector can put their hands to their heart and say, we deduct and remit payee taxes completely in accordance with the law? I'm sure that Mr. A can help even speak to that. You find that that's hardly the case. And so these things, when government is denied revenue from legitimate sources, you find that sometimes, and I'm not justifying it, but I'm just putting some context to it. You find that sometimes people then resort to unorthodox methods to shore up the federal government has done what it can do, which is try and come up with a list, working through the platform of the Joint Tax Board, of the charges and the taxes that are that are allowable, and this is made public. I think that there are dispute resolution mechanisms. The courts exist as well for companies to be able to complaining or anything on the side probably ultimately doesn't deliver the solution. We should engage the system, including the courts, to be able to deal with this where there are actually there's overreach on the part.
Yeah. So Prof, I would like to, because I know
I was going to respond to that. I've been called many things, but not Prof yet.
No, you're an expert in your own field, and that makes you a professor. So I want to respond because we have the telcos. The telcos are not part of this panel session, but I'd like to say something, especially on the African charts that you put together. You can recognize that Nigeria has the highest population in these countries that were listed. I'm not an advocate for the telcos, but at the same time, I believe that what the telcos want is a social contract, because taxation is a social contract. I pay my taxes and you let me know what you do with my taxes. But I'm not here to advocate for them. But one thing I would like to say is every company is set up to minimize its costs in order to have a maximized profits. And the contribution that you mentioned from the sector, vice versa, the tax paid by that sector. I believe even the association of the Telecom Association can have a dialogue with you, and there should be uniformity in what we're talking about. That's why we have this platform where they can speak their mind. Unfortunately, they're in the background now because they can't direct their questions to you. But I have a question that is directed at you from an audience. It says, the DG is right about the low level of taxation. The problem is eating taxation. This does not go into government coffers, but drives up cost of business. That is just a comment from my audience. And
yeah, what is taxation? We can only address issues that we know of. If you say there's hidden taxation, be specific. Say so-and-so agency or so-and-so whatever state is charging us this, or so-and-so local government. And we can then engage. There is a platform of the National Economic Council where monthly, the vice president chairs this and all the governors are in attendance. The Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning is there as well. You know, we have the secretariat for that. It is a platform to engage matters like this, you know. So we need to move from just these generalizations to specifics. Let's make specific, you know, complaints, and you know, say so and so state is doing this, so and so local government is doing this, so and so individual, so and so official of government is doing this, and then people can provide solutions. That's
Thank you, Ben. Thank you so much for your slides. It was interesting for me to see them. But I have a lot of questions from the audience. Please do feel free to go on slido.com, taxcon, and send that's hashtag taxcon to send in your question. But I have this question for Bonjumola. How much has the FRS engaged with sectors with high prospects, such as the telcos and IT sectors, to foster more sustainable tax policies?
Right. Thank you very much, Fumi, for that question. Let me start by saying that the business of tax essentially revolves around engagement with all stakeholders. And from the Federal Revenue Service point of view, this is routine for us. For example, in all the policies that we have had to come out with, whether with respect to automation, with respect to sectoral taxation, we have an internal process of continuous engagement before coming out with policies. And so, answering your questions directly, with the not just the telecom industry, with all other industries directly affected by our policies, we have a system of back-end engagement. Now, having engagement is one thing, having an agreement is another thing. Because I can tell you that there's nowhere in the world that anybody goes to the taxman to pay with a smile. I think it's only in the church that people give offering with a dance. So taxation is not like that. And so, yes, you could engage, you could have forum or fora where we discuss, but somebody wants it this way, the other person wants it that way. And so what we try to do is to see, are we able to come to the middle? And sometimes you find out that, yes, we are easily able to come to the middle. Sometimes we are even able to immediately accept the proposals or propositions of the other party. But there are sometimes when you are not able to move away because whether there are legislative constraints, whether there are expediency or issues of public interest. So all of this will come. I could understand the concerns of the industry in the telecom area, to the effect that, oh, all right, you are actually allowing some businesses to have palliatives, to delay filing of returns, to have this, and then you are asking us to say, come and pay when the other businesses are not paying. But just like Ben said, I mean, let's put this in perspective. And I gave you a very common example. It's not only in Lagos State or in Sokoto State or in Enugu State. Most teachers in our private institutions did not collect salary between the month of March and September. It is a fact. Most hotels did not open their businesses during this period. It is a fact. Most transporters could not do their businesses. It is a fact. However, we have some businesses that remained open. We know even for them to remain open, it was challenging. We understand that fact. But the fact still remains that they were open. So this is what we are talking about. So we could understand that, oh, they could have that feeling and say, why are we paying taxes? Why are you giving palliative to others and we are not getting? We understood. But it is the exigency of the times, of the seasons. And if for those who did not take up that, the service did not do anything to enforce that. We only stick what the law says. So if there's going to be any issue of enforcement or compliance, it's still within what the law had provided for. So we're actually not taking away their rights, and we have not attempted to do that. So I think let me stop there because there could be more questions from you.
Yes, thank you. And I want to give a personal comment to Mr. Gbojibola here to say, we always want so much, right? We are Oliver Twist. We enjoy the palliatives, but can we just have more of the waiver of penalty and interest till the end of the year? So we understand that you are with us, and Ben is listening. So it takes my comment one level higher than the FRS here. So that's just my comment. So we have, I'm just happy to introduce Teju Shomori. She had some technical issues, but she's back here, and I'm so happy to have her here. You're welcome, ma'am. So, Teju, please can we have Teju? Okay, while we still await Teju, I'll just ask Mr. Gbojibola this question. I'm just so used to saying Mr. Gbojibola, just pardon me on that. So do you consider the telcos and technology sectors unique in their capacity to grow the economy and attract investment into the country? And how can these peculiarities be harnessed?
Yeah, thanks for me for that. Thanks for me for that question.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, welcome back. It's good to have you. I'll just take the question from Matthew Gbojibola and then I'll come to you, ma'am.
Okay, that's all right.
Thank you.
All right, thanks very much for me for that question. For the Federal Inland Revenue Service, every sector is very important and key to the economy, not just the technology industry, which we also consider very, very important. And for us, let's, for example, look at agriculture. Will somebody say to me, agriculture is not key and important to driving the economy? I think I expect that the consensus will be that yes, the medical, the health sector, is it very important to driving the economy? My answer would be a resounding yes. And so in essence for us, every industry that has any contribution to the growth of economy is very important. Now, technology, maybe before now in our part of the world, had not been much of a catalyst that we expect for other businesses. And that is because we are not the producer of technology. We largely import technology. And so now that we are waking up to the use of technology and its application in other businesses, I think that is when our consciousness is coming. And I do agree that they are able to take our business performances in all sectors to higher levels. For example, in a year ago, we would not have been having this seminar the way we are having it. We will have had to go and get a physical place, and people have had to travel from one location to the other. Now we are able to have this. Why? Courtesy of technology. Now that we have woken up to the consciousness that we can use this. So within that context, then we can see that technology can be a great enabler, not just for technology as an industry, but across all the value chains within the macroeconomy. And so that is the way I see the role of technology. Yes. And that is the way I hope we are able to adopt technology. And that is also the way I hope that we can get our youth, our younger ones come and see how they can find a place with the use of technology for art, for music, for building, for whatever it is that we choose to do.
Yeah.
Thank you for me.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to direct two questions to Teju. Maureen. One interesting one. That I know she's going to be eager to talk about is taxation of the digital economy. But my first question to you is, what are your recommendations on the use of tax policies to attract investments to enhance economic recovery? One question from the audience that I'm going to direct to Teju also is, what, because we have less than 5 minutes to the end of the session, what is government doing to
Thank you very much for that question.
Okay.
The way I'm, in respect of tax policies. Oh.
Go ahead, please.
Okay. Which one do you want me to address first?
The one for the recommendation, and the second one is,
Hello.
What is government doing to assist
for the recommendations? On the recommendations that government can do to improve tax revenue generally, whether telecom is that one first. So on the issue of recommendations, so many recommendations are already with the government. The issue is that of implementation. Let me first of all take it as previous work that have in respect of tax reforms or studies in Nigeria.
Can we please see your face?
There have been some study groups that have done some work. So let me just take some of the recommendations. If you look at that of the revised national tax, okay, it's the phone. Is it okay now?
Yes, it is.
Hello?
Thank you. Yes,
okay
it
now?
is.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm talking about from the point of view of the revised national tax policy. But before I go into that, the responsibility on how to boost tax revenue is on two parties: the government itself and those that are being governed. Government has the role to play, while those that are governed, they also have a role to play. And the roles are clearly stated in the Constitution for both the government and the governed. For the people that are supposed to pay the tax, it is clearly stated in Section 24 that it is their duty to pay their tax and to do it correctly. So now, on the recommendations that have been done before, let me first of all start with that of the revised national tax policy. There are some recommendations there that are not yet implemented. So let us start from the recommendations that are already in the pipeline, but waiting to be implemented. The first one is that all politicians, anytime they are going to have their manifesto, they are coming up and making all sorts of promises that this is what we are going to do when I become governor, when I become this, when I become that. The revised national tax policy, one of the recommendations is that they should make it public where they are going to get the revenue to do all those promises. That recommendation has not yet been implemented. That is still outstanding. I believe that that one will go a long way when it is done. The other recommendation by the revised national tax policy is the fact that tax laws should be simplified. We still need to simplify further some of our tax laws. The Stamp Duties Act is the one that I can quickly, remember, we'll talk about now. If you look at the wordings of the Stamp Duties Act, it's difficult for even the operators, the tax administrators, not to talk of taxpayers, to be able to understand what they're supposed to do about the stamp duties. So one of the canons of taxation is by Adam Smith, and it's that simplification of tax laws. So that is very important. And also there had been a recommendation which is yet to be implemented, and that is to establish an Office of Tax Simplification. And that responsibility falls on the Federal Ministry of Finance. That has not been done. So I'm looking forward to the day that will be done. Then good governance is another issue that is very, very key to how to promote additional revenue. Good governance, that is on the part of government. When I carried out a survey for the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, one of those and the people that we interviewed from the survey, what we got was that they said that although they want to pay tax, they are willing to pay tax, but they want to see what government is using the tax for. So that one, we need to work on that. Good governance is very, very important. When taxpayers, those that are supposed to pay the tax, when they're able to see what government is doing with the tax, the voluntary compliance will be promoted. Another point that I noticed that we discovered during that survey is the issue of a multiplicity of taxes, which has been mentioned when the man from technology, that my colleague from technology was talking, I think Odushola also, the issue of multiple taxes. There is one law that was set up to address the issue of taxes and different types of taxes. It's called Taxes and Levies. The Taxes and Levies law, it needs to be reviewed. In fact, some people have called that the Taxes and Levies Act, it should even be repealed, that it should not be in the statute anymore. But we still can do some work, because if you look at that taxes and levies, about 65 or more taxes, 65 or 66 are listed there that a taxpayer should pay. So that one, we need to work on it if you want to improve the revenue that is supposed to be paid. Then the other issue that I want to talk about is that taxpayers should be treated as king. Treat taxpayers as king. Let them have some incentives that will support them, as I said, that will support them to pay tax. So that one is also very important. Then tax court needs to be established. It is part of the recommendation of that of the national tax policy. That one has not yet been done. The tax court should be established so that when there are tax disputes, there'll be a first place that they can take the matters to. Then the issue of capacity on the part of tax administrators is very important, because when a tax administrator is confused and he doesn't know left from right, how can you advise a taxpayer or a tax consultant? So that's another area that we need to look at. The Finance Act that was promulgated early this year, it contains so many tax measures that the tax officers, I'm happy that Mr. Bojibola is here, the tax officers, they need to be educated on the application of many of those changes, because there are not less than 93 changes that are in the Finance Act. So that is another area they need to familiarize themselves with. Then at times when you talk to some of the tax officers, you get different interpretations on a particular tax issue. So their capacity needs to be beefed up domestically and also internationally, so that they can even meet up with their colleagues when they travel abroad. So that is also important. Then Nigeria should put in place a plan for tax reform. Nigeria should not wait until there is an issue before we decide to say, okay, let us start the reform. When I was in the service, in Federal Inland Revenue Service, it was part of our functions to write a recommendation to the chairman that there's need to do a reform. But let there be a plan. Nigeria should be able to say, okay, every 5 years, there should be tax reform. We don't need to wait until there are issues. The issue of multiple taxes, it was when a lot of taxpayers, especially the Manufacturers Association, it was when they wrote to the Federal Revenue Service and the Joint Tax Board, it was then that government said, how many taxes are you even collecting in Nigeria? There was no answer. We didn't have any answer because I was there at that time. Nobody knew. That was why the federal government now said, okay, go and do this study on the taxes in Nigeria. And we were shocked. That study, we discovered that there are so many taxes, over 350 taxes, levies, charges that were being collected in Nigeria. So the issue of tax reform, let there be a plan that, okay, every 5 years, there must be tax reform, so that all the tax laws, we start from the policy, because it's from the policy that you derive tax law. If there is no tax policy, you cannot have tax law. Once you have a tax policy, then you now have you enact a law. After the law, then the administration will set in. Those are the three components of a Nigerian tax system. So tax processes need to be simplified. Let the taxpayers get something back for the taxes they are paying or they intend to pay, so that when they are able to see it, they will know what to do. Then the Finance Bill, the Finance Act of 2019 that was introduced only last year, I want it to be sustained. That was the practice during the military. It was every year that they were reviewing all the tax laws. Although the terminology they were using that time, just as that time was somebody said, is a Finance Miscellaneous Taxation Provisions Decree. And it was very, very fast. They don't waste time. The military, every year, they were always amending tax laws. And each time they amended the tax law, it's not only one, they would amend about 3 or 4 tax laws. They take so many issues at the same time. And you know the military is decree. Immediately implementation every year, non-stop.
Wow.
Until the last one stopped in 1999. Look at the case of Peter, Personal Income Tax Act, Cap P8 LFN 2004. It was first of all enacted in 1993. Peter was not amended until 2011 for the first time. From 1993 to 2011, it was not enacted. So there are too many gaps when we, amend our tax laws, and even the tax laws that we have amended, so many of them, they still have issues.
Wow, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Prof. In fact, you spoke the minds of the audience, and I love that question, or your response to the question. So I just want to send, I have one question for Ben, and it's about the impact of, an audience sent a question around just to understand what government is going to do now that income flow of our businesses have reduced. What is government going to do about the taxes that they expect? So taxes are paid by citizens since businesses simply pass their taxes to the consumers whose income are not increasing. How will government make tax benefits for the citizen? So we have just in 1 minute, please help us with that question, or with answers to the question. That's to Ben, please.
Yeah, basically, okay, it's a real problem, as I highlighted earlier. The expectations from government keep growing, and yet the revenue sources. So we're not looking at new taxes, but clearly we're looking to improve, collection efficiency. We're focusing more on tax administration to make sure that people pay what is rightfully due. If you look at our fiscal framework for 2021, we're projecting a lower income from taxation in 2021 than we did for 2020, because we recognize the reality that, if you take corporate income taxes, for instance, that are on a preceding year basis, the taxes for 2020 were on income of 2019, which, across board, generally will be better than that so we've taken that, we've factored that, but nobody is going to get a complete waiver on taxation and saying, because government itself isn't going to get, a waiver on its own, responsibilities. And so it's tough on everyone. And oftentimes people forget that even the policymakers in government are themselves not exempted from these taxes. So you're not looking at some bunch of wicked fellows who just want to tax life out of everybody. Nobody's going to work in government forever. And so when people come up with this, whatever, it is because they've really considered them to be in the overall best interest of all of us.
Thank you so much. So I know we can go on and on and on and on, but this is all that we have time to take on this segment of the conference. I want to thank each of the panelists for taking out time from their busy schedule to make this conference a success. I also want to thank the organizers of this conference, Business Day, TCSWG, for a job well done. Thank you so much to our audience for all the questions. I know you still have a lot of questions, and we have the poll going on. I'm going to hand over to our host, Emilia. She's going to announce the winner of the poll. And thank you all for having me. Thank you so much. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fumi, for an excellent job. Well done. Fumi is a manager with Anderson Tax Nigeria. We thank you for your role in moderating and facilitating the conversations. And you would have noted that Fumi does have subject matter expertise in the conversation that just rounded off. She has over 10 years of professional experience in various tax compliance and advisory services. She's also functioned in the capacity of a tax advisor to a number of MSMEs and multinational companies who operate in various sectors. She has also advised these organizations on tax issues and proactively provided them with support, also serving as an intermediary, of course, between the public sector and the private sector in a consulting capacity. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Manager, Private Clients and Family Wealth Group now with Anderson Tax. So it's time for us to, look at the polls. I would like for us to get the poll results. But just before we announce the poll results, I would like to invite one of the members of the group who will be giving us a thank you and closing remark. A seasoned legal practitioner with over 27 years post-call experience, having worked in commercial law firms and lived in Ghana for a while. She moved into the telecommunications space and currently heads government and legislative affairs for one of the operators. She's also the chairperson of the Legal and Regulatory Committee of the Association of Licensed Telecommunication Operators as Alton in Nigeria. Eno Udoma Inyang is Eno on. We would listen to Eno for a few minutes and then we'll take the poll results. I think they're still being collated. And then we would come back to round off properly. Eno, over to you.
Thank you very much, Amelia. Just to correct that, I have almost 30 years post-call experience. But I've been in telecoms sector for that long. Thank you very much for inviting me and allowing me to speak last. This means that I have the final word, Emilia. But I must say it's a real honor listening to these great men and women contributing to shaping the landscape of Nigeria's economy. The panel selection is certainly most appropriate and balanced, not just selected to do justice to the topic, but to guarantee that the recommendations are given due consideration, especially as the relevant decision makers, like my brother, the DG Budget, and the FIRS are present. There's no doubt that the current government has introduced impressive tax reforms. For instance, of course, the Finance Act, which was recently passed, and of course, reforms in the areas of companies' income tax, personal income tax, VAT, and capital gains. But I must say that the impact of this review is majorly felt in the SME segment. So, and there's a lot of incentives for the SMEs, small and medium enterprises. However, they need to seriously consider the fact that bigger companies, by the way, categorized as such on the basis of turnover, not profit, are not necessarily doing well. And this fact should be considered in carrying out reforms. Secondly, the challenge that the sector providing the opportunity for growing the government's digital economy, the challenge it has is not just with the well-defined and structured federal taxes as was captured in the DG's analysis, but with the taxes and levies at the states and local government levels. And by the way, they are taxes and levies, because I know the DG mentioned that all these things are not taxes, but there are some of these that are also levies and are captured within the Taxes and Levies Act.
Some of these demands are made on an arbitral basis and are also very unpredictable, as the operators within the sector attempt to deploy infrastructure to extend footprint and to broaden the coverage areas for broadband penetration. The government has actually set a lofty goal of 90% penetration by 2025. And I mean, currently, what I see on the NCC website is about 46.6% penetration. So it's definitely a lofty goal. The taxes and levies that greatly impact the tech and telecoms businesses, which rely heavily on expansion of infrastructure deployment for coverage and connectivity, are majorly at the state levels and the local government levels, where these companies face serious challenges with deployment of infrastructure. A recent study by NCC found that not just are the telcos subjected to about 41 taxes and levies. Yes, DG, they are actually 41 taxes from the findings and levies. These charges are also retrospective and were quite arbitral and prohibitive, therefore making planning a challenge and resulting in a lot of time wastage in negotiations, disputes, resolution, and litigation. In fact, the cost of multiple taxation has been found to run into billions for the industry. Just to say thanks to the DG, the industry will definitely be submitting this list to the Budget Office for intervention. However, the analysis by the DG didn't also take into consideration the peculiarities of doing business in Nigeria. For instance, unlike other countries, a typical telco runs a 4-in-1 network. The telco has to provide its power and diesel distribution network, security, transmission network, and also its actual network. So consequently, the companies incur huge and prohibitive costs in CapEx and OpEx. In managing or the monthly spend, it's been found that the monthly spend in Nigeria for maintaining one cell site is about $6,000. If you compare that with a Ghana, for instance, in Ghana it's about $3,000. That's half the cost. Therefore, among other things, there is need for national enlightenment, and there is need to unify, as was recommended by the broadband plan, recent broadband plan. There is need to unify and align taxation in Nigeria to avoid arbitrariness. Mr. Oyedele mentioned that focus should be on expansion of the tax net as opposed to overburdening the already overtaxed compliant businesses. I also like the recommendation by Mr. Oyedele for the repeal of some of the moribund taxes, and maybe also the review of the Taxes and Levies Act, even though Prof has said it should be totally done away with. But I think we'll have a discussion on that separately. I think there should be a review anyway. As a start, the Joint Tax Board may need to take the lead and possibly issue directives to the states pursuant to the Taxes and Levies Act for uniformity of the taxes and levies rates nationwide to aid planning. More states also need to understand the negative economic impact of multiple, illegal, and exorbitant taxation. There's also need for government to consider back-end taxing. The tax that government will get from thriving commerce cannot be compared to tokens at initial deployment. Therefore, helping businesses grow will ultimately help government grow IGR. Obviously, as a final word, there is need for a better handshake between government and the private sector, especially the telecommunications sector, in better understanding and addressing the pain points on both sides. And this would definitely lead to a positive impact on commerce and invariably growth of the economy. Thank you very much. And we'll be sending our submissions to the DG's office. Thank you, Emilia.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Eno. As said, this is a continuous conversation. It cannot all be resolved in one session, but we thank very much all our speakers for making time to participate, in this industry, all important industry conversation this morning. I'd like to also thank all the panelists who have shared very freely and honestly of their experiences, their perspectives, and their expectations. As said by we'll collate all of the recommendations into a document and forward to all the appropriate stakeholders so as to continue this conversation. Now, I'd like to take the poll results very quickly so that we can round off. The poll results are on your screen. The first question, the tax burden, impressions. How would you rate the tax burden on the corporate sector? We have the highest point there as being excessive. The second, are you satisfied with the utilization of the revenue generated? Most participants said they're dissatisfied. What type of user are you? Was important to find out. And we have the second option of users who say plan B is important. That's those who have more than one cell phone line or data source. Yes, and then number one, very loyal. So we have two numbers. Most participants are dual users of at least two operators of telecommunication services. And then the second to the last, what are your main forms of communication? Social on the phone, okay? So most participants still use their cell phones more than they use social networking apps and platforms. And then the last but certainly not the least, how would you rate broadband? How would you rate broadband services for businesses? The highest vote there went to excessive. The rates for broadband services are excessive. So we hope that all the relevant stakeholders will take note of this. We'll also include these in the report from this event and will be sent to all stakeholders. I'd like to thank very, very much all our participants and thank Fumi Olani as well for moderating the session. Please, let's continue this conversation and keep engaging as a group. We'll continue to reach out even after we send the document and continue these conversations and hope that on the public sector side and non-profit side, we'll be obliged with listening ears. Thank you all very much. On behalf of the Telecommunications and Technology Sustainability Working Group, would like to say thank you to all our participants for joining us this afternoon. Please follow us on our social media platforms, TTSWG_NG, and we hope to bring you many more industry conversations like this on very important issues as well as provide an update on this conversation. So thank you very much and have a very, very good afternoon. For the speakers who are on the interface app, we'd please like you to put on your videos. We'd like to take a group photograph. Business Day Media would really like that so that we can use that for some of the post-event reports that will go into the media. Please put on your videos so that we can take a group photograph, and I will get the prompt once that has been done, and then we can please go back to our respective activities. Okay, so we're still waiting for a few more. No, please, can you put on your video, Dr. Kitty? Thank you. Okay, I don't know who Phoebe Mohammed is and Richard, but I believe we can go with this. All right, so I'll wait for the prompt for when the photograph has been taken. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Nami, as well, for joining us. Thank you very much. Would have loved to have you participate, but I'm sure Mr. Bojubola did justice to the conversation and also communicated the position of the FIRS. Thank you, Mr. Kabwezi. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Debayo, Teniola, and Prof. Thank you so much, everyone. So, from Business Day, any last words, or we can all leave the platform now?
No, it's just to say thank you. I mean, I listened very, very carefully to all the conversations, and I mean, these were very, very robust conversations, and I made a point. I made a point on the chart. Listen, I said that the DG is right in terms of the level of taxation in the country. I think the problem, the missing thing, and I think maybe this is something that TTSWG will have to look at, is the hidden taxation, in the taxation. I mean, how many things do we actually pay for that does not go into the coffers of the government? This one collect this one collect that, this one collect this, you know. Like the DG said, I mean, you have 39 taxes. Are they really taxes? For instance, let me give you an example. I live in Abuja, and if you, all those guys that wash their vehicles at every corner in Abuja, I was stunned just a few weeks ago that you actually have environmental people that go around and collect 1,000 from them every Saturday, every day of the week. They go and collect 1,000, and I'm sure that money does not go into the coffers of the FCT government. So those are the things that we need to look at when we're talking about taxation. The 8% that the DGs mentioned does not reflect what the businesses actually pay. So who are the people that pocket these resources? That's something we need to consider. Thank you so very much. Very, very robust participation and discussion from everyone. I really appreciate all you. You're providing your time, your insight in this conversation. I thank you all, and please have a great business day afternoon. Thank you. God bless you.
All right. Thank you.